So chapter 7 is based around the influence that the news media had on denouncing the first risings of the KKK and how they were able to kind of take down the power that they had at the very beginning, being that the KKK still exists today, but this chapter is based around the 1920s when they were first really, really big and powerful. The chapter goes around to talk about the background of the KKK, how they were against Catholics, Jewish people, Black people, and more recent immigrants, how the KKK got into political standings, how they started getting really powerful government seats. They were in the Senate, and they were starting to really influence the politics of especially the Deep South. The chapter then goes on to talk about how newspapers were originally scared to talk about the KKK and to denounce them because they were so powerful and that they didn't want them to ruin their paper or even worse, like hurt anybody that, you know, worked for the paper or anything like that. So the chapter talks about the first expose to come out against the KKK that really began the severe damage that the KKK was going to experience. It was called the Ku Klux Klan Exposed by the New York World. It came out and actually ended up being a 3-week series that was just so explosive. You know, it just talked about all of these accusations against the KKK that people didn't know about before. Unfortunately, it did end up rising the number of members in the KKK just because, you know, it was getting free publicity because it was in the paper, and there were people out there that didn't read the article and go, wow, this is terrible. They read the article and went, wow, I want to be a part of that. Basically, the chapter talks about how after that expose came out, another expose came out by the Commercial Appeal that was equally explosive, and then another one came out by the Montgomery Advertiser that was just as powerful, and all three ended up winning Pulitzer Prizes, which is the highest American journalism award. And then they talk about how the New York World forced the police to take a stance on the KKK, being that they didn't really give them a choice to not comment, which forced them to condemn the KKK, which really set in motion the KKK not being able to infiltrate New York City or the surrounding areas. For ethical dilemmas that the news media faced, I can see how it would be really hard to ethically denounce a group that described themselves as like a religious moral organization. And at the time, not a lot of people knew that the KKK was this horrible organization. They just knew that it was this religious organization. But again, with the ethical dilemmas, they were publishing names and addresses of KKK leaders, which is legal, but is also like a dangerous game to play because you never know what people who read that are going to go do. Like, they could go hurt somebody at one of those addresses, and that is, you know, what people are trying to end. They're trying to do no harm. Also, they were fighting for the right to free press, the freedom of press, the entire time, especially towards the end of the chapter when they talk about how the KKK was trying to pass a bill that basically made it hard for newspapers to not be tried for libel ever. Anything they said negative against the KKK would be considered libel, and they could be tried for things before the bill was even passed, and it was a crazy amount of money that they would be fined if they were actually charged with libel. So I think that the news media practiced virtue ethics, especially because the journalists were more focused on, you know, their morality and trying to stop the violence that the KKK was increasingly practicing in. You know, they were trying to get rid of the bigotry and the racism and get back to a place where people felt safe going outside and didn't have to worry about people coming after them just because of who they were or what they believed in. So the ethical violation, I think that publishing the names and the addresses could have been a little bit of an ethical thing. I don't think it was a legal thing, but it seems like it would be a pretty dangerous game to publish full name and address just because you never know what people who read that are going to do. You don't want to cause more harm than the KKK was already causing themselves. They also pretty much forced the police to take a stance on the KKK, which is a little bit of an ethical dilemma because they didn't really give them a chance to say no comment, which ended up being a good thing because it was able to drive out the KKK from New York City and the surrounding areas. That said, I think the news media met the 9 core principles of journalism pretty well. You know, number 1, they tried their best to do no harm. 3, they were doing their best to benefit others. They were just trying to keep everybody safe, to keep the KKK from hurting any more people. And especially 7 and 8. 7 is treat others with caring and compassion. They were definitely compassionate to Catholics, Blacks, Jewish people, and recent immigrants. They were trying to keep them from harm's way. And the pursuit of excellence, if you were to win a Pulitzer Prize, you'd have to be really up in that really high standard of journalism. So they definitely worked really hard to get the right facts and figures and have a really great article at the end. I think a modern day example of this would be, so we have the media blowing up all of the stories about the KKK, just constantly pushing stories about the KKK, and people actually ended up reading it and thinking, wow, I want to be a part of that organization. So more people joined the KKK and their membership numbers rose, which their money rose because people were paying fees to get into the KKK. And the modern day example of that would be the media blowing up stories about Donald Trump. And when he was running for president, they would run all of these stories like, oh, this crazy thing that Trump said, oh, this crazy thing that Trump did. And then people would look at it and be like, oh, wow, that's actually kind of cool, and go to a Trump rally or vote for Trump or something, which ended up giving him the election. So I think the class should really talk about how do you establish between news and free advertising, because you're giving them publicity by talking about them in the newspaper. So how do you keep news and free advertising separated from each other? So yeah, thank you.